Hello. The next section that we have here is converting between ratios, fractions, decimals, and percents. And again, this unit is all about converting between those bits and pieces of a whole. So the first one they have done for you, 3 shots made for every 4 shots fired. That's, or tried, I guess these would be like basketball shots. So it'd be, a fraction would be 3 out of 4. And that would turn into 75 out of 100, or 75 hundredths. And that would be like 75%. So the next one that they have for us to figure out is the ratio of goldfish to the total fish in the bowl. So again, we were talking about ratios. So the number of goldfish is 22, and there's a total of 40 that are in the tank. So that would be the fraction, 22 out of 40. And we're trying to turn that into a decimal. The way we've been talking about turning fractions into decimals is trying to turn them into fractions that have 10 or 100 or 1,000 as a denominator, as the bottom number. Because if we can do that, then we can easily make them into decimals by just saying the fraction. So I want to see if I can turn 22 out of 40 into something out of 100 or something out of 10. So I have a couple different options here. I could divide this by 4, and that would make it 10, but I can't really divide 22 by 4. It doesn't really work out. So there's not an easy way to make 40 into 100. So that's kind of tricky. So what I'm going to do is see, maybe there's a different way I can write this fraction that will make it easier to change into one of these. So I see that both the top and the bottom are even. So that means I could cut the top and the bottom in half. Let me see if that would help. So that would be 11 out of 20. So we learned that this fraction and this fraction are equivalent. They mean the same thing. This fraction does seem like I could make it turn into a fraction out of 100. By taking the denominator times 5, I can make that into 100. And if I do that same thing to the numerator, which I have to do in order for these fractions to be the same, 11 times 5 is 55. So this fraction, even though it doesn't seem like it could become this, if I change it into a different form, that form is more obviously able to be turned into 55 over 100. Now that I have 55 over 100, 55 hundredths, that's another name for this decimal, 55 hundredths. So there's the decimal. We learned that percents mean out of 100, so since we already have this out of 100, that would be 55%. Right? So these would be the answers that we could use. Or this would also be a correct fraction. The next one we have is for every 15 lights on the sign, 10 are out. So that means how many lights are on the sign? Well, there's 15 lights on the sign, and 10 are out. So my fraction would look like this, 10 out of 15. That's how many lights are out, 10 out of 15. And then I need to turn that again. Our strategy is to turn it into a fraction out of 10 or 100. So I don't see, again, obviously, how to turn this into a fraction out of 10 or 100. I can, though, make it into a new fraction. If I divide the top by 5 and the bottom by 5, I can get a fraction 2/3. 2/3 we call a benchmark fraction, and we learned some ways of turning that into a decimal. 2/3 is like taking 100 and breaking it into 3 parts and looking at the 2. We learned that it's not going to work out exactly right, but we can make kind of an estimate. So if I divide this up, it's going to be about 33. About 33 each one makes 99. So it's actually a little bit more than that. And we learned that this would keep repeating. So 2/3 is not quite a whole, but it's 2 of these parts. So we learned that that would be around 0.66. And we can put a line over this last 6 to show that that 6 would repeat. So that would be as close probably as we can get as a decimal with 2 places. Then I need to make this into a percent. We know that percent means out of 100. This is 66 hundredths. So it would work out to around 66%, something like that. Students could, if they wanted to, do 66.66%. or even 66.67% and round it up. I would probably accept any of those as evidence that they know how to convert. Let's see, I'm going to do the next one up here. It says 90 students passed the test for every 100 students that took it. So again, the fraction would be 90 out of 100. That would be our fraction. We said that if a fraction is out of 10 or 100, if it's tenths or hundredths, then we can make it into a decimal very easily. 90 hundredths looks like this as a decimal, 0.90. So that would be our decimal number. And then any fraction out of 100, the top number is going to be a percent. So this would also be 90%. And then the last one says, for every 8 hunters, only 1 got a deer. So what fraction would got a deer? It would be 1 out of 8. 1 out of 8. So then I need to turn that into a fraction, or sorry, into a decimal. And again, our strategy that we learned was to try to make that decimal, make it into a decimal out of 10 or 100. We talked in class, again, this is another benchmark fraction. So it's a fraction that we could learn what the decimal equivalent would be. But there is a way to do that. What we could do is, again, think about this, 1/8 as half of a fourth, because 1/8 is like 1/8 is half of a fourth, 1/4 is 2/8, and so this would be half of this. So I know 1/4 is 0.25, so that means 1/8 would be half of that. So if I wanted to take half of this, it would be, well, it'd be easier to take half if it was like that. So if I took half of that, it would be 0.125. So that would be the decimal version of 1/8. And then if I wanted to make that into a percent, I would look at these places, because these are in the hundreds place. We learned this trick of moving the decimal over 2 places. So that would work out to 12.5%. 12.5%. Again, if I was thinking this through, I would say, 1/8, there's about 8 pieces that would make a whole, or 8 pieces that would make 100%. So I could also say 100% divided by 8. I could use my calculator and figure out that it would be about 12.5%. So I hope that's helpful.